Hi, everyone. Welcome to Chicago Autism Network's virtual parent workshops. Tonight, we are very lucky to have Meg Cooch, who is the Deputy Director of the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Developmental Disabilities, as the longest title I've ever said. But she knows a lot. We are really grateful to have her and help us navigate the services that are available to all of us through the state. So I'll turn the time over to Meg.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the invitation to be here tonight. My name is Meg Cooch. I'm a Deputy Director at the Division of Developmental Disabilities. There'll be some alphabet soup today, but I'm hoping that I can at least say it once or twice before I jump into alphabet soup, and feel free to put in the chat if you're like, what's that acronym mean again? And I appreciate the invitation tonight. So I came from, most recently, I've been at the division for about 2 years, but prior to that, I was the exec at the ARC of Illinois. So I felt like I did a lot more of this opportunity to be able to actually talk to parents and family members and people that are trying to navigate the many systems throughout the lifespan. So I'm thrilled to be here tonight. I was asked to talk a little bit about the scope and range of supports that the Division of DD can offer people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this is a very kind of overview. We do have some more information, and I always encourage you, obviously, to go to this terrific group, and there are many resources, and the parents and family groups are, I think, some of the strongest in terms of really navigating the system. But my email is at the end, and if there is something that you want to email follow up offline, you're certainly welcome to email it to me. I might not be the person that knows the answer, but I can try to find it for you, which is a lot of, frankly, what I do today, these days at the division. So a little bit about tonight. I think I'm just going to talk for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then have lots of time for questions or comments or feedback. If there's something you want to share in your experience, we appreciate it all. But we'll talk a little bit tonight about the Division of Developmental Disabilities and what we fund. We're going to focus primarily on home and community-based waiver services more than on the institutional side of services, but I'll talk briefly about that because it's important for you to know kind of the full range of services that might be available. We'll talk a little bit about the PUNS list, which did have an acronym. It did stand for something. Now it just is called the PUNS list, which we'll talk about. And we'll talk about the Ligas Consent Decree, which is something that I work on pretty much every day. And then finally, there'll be time for questions. So just a little bit about the Division of DD. The Division of Developmental Disabilities is about a $2 billion agency. So a lot of money comes into the division. Most of that goes for our institutional or waiver services, so that support people, children and adults with developmental disabilities. We do have a number of grants as well, which I think I can talk about at the end if people want to find out more about that. But really our focus is to support and create and fund services that are designed to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, in particularly to attain their wants, needs, and dreams, which is our mission, and probably the mission of most of the people that are invested in supporting people, and particularly in the community. So as I said, the Division of Developmental Disabilities funds both intermediate care facilities for the developmentally disabled, a mouthful. It's ICF-DD or ICF. We fund private ICF, and we fund public ICF. Public ICFs are also known as state-operated developmental centers. And that's the reason we fund that. It's important because Medicaid requires, like for aging with nursing homes, Medicaid requires that there be an institutional entitlement for people with IDD, for people with disabilities, a place where people can go, originally way back in the history, when there was no other place for people to go, right? And so institutional care can look like nursing homes, it can look like ICF, it can look like mental health facilities or institutions. It kind of can look very different. And in the DD world, ICF can be very small, 8-bed. In the community, they look very similar to what we think of as group homes. They can also be very large, like 100-person larger facilities. They do have different rules, and they also have different requirements. So in the waiver, people have a person-centered plan, which I'll talk about in a second, which is not exactly what happens at ICF. So it's important to know the differences, and there's a case manager that can help you decide the differences of what might work for you. The other big thing that we fund is home and community-based waiver services. We fund about 25,000 children and adults in waiver services. And waiver services is just a fancy way for saying that we put together and packaged a set of services, a menu of services that help to support people to live in their homes and in the community. So not in an institutional, more institutional setting. And 23,000 of those are for the adult services waiver. That's why I'm going to mostly talk about that tonight. And that's pretty much most of what a person's life is spent in that waiver as opposed to the children's waivers. But I do want to make sure to mention there's a children's support waiver, which is another way called a home-based waiver, where a person receives a budget and money to spend on personal support workers and things like that for a child that lives at home. And then children's residential, which is a much smaller group of people, kids who aren't able to live in their home anymore. And so they go to group homes, smaller group homes. But a waiver, as I said, is a group of services, a package of services that help to support people, but it's a set package for a very specific population, in this case, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they can build a box and say only this many number of people. We can max out. Whereas with entitlement and institutional services, there is no max. If you are eligible for the service, the state must pay for you to have that service. Waivers, unfortunately, are not yet entitlements. Hopefully one day they will be, and so everyone will be entitled to the service. But right now it results in sometimes a wait of a couple of years to get access to the service or more. So you can see before you, as we kind of talk about and think about the adult services waiver, and the adult services waiver is for anyone 18 and older. So as you think about it, it's kind of a weird thing because we think about transition as 22, right? The day before your 22nd birthday, but actually the adult services waiver, people can go in at 18 if they either get a selection letter or selected off of funds, or if they for some reason go into crisis services. So you can see here there's a mix of options, although I would like to see a growth and diversity of those options, which we're really trying to push towards. We have kind of a group of options right now. We have the self-directed option for services, which is this home-based model. That's where you get a set budget and you can determine each month, monthly, you can determine the package of services, how much personal support you might want, how much community day you might want, if you want supported employment help, things like that. There's upsides to it because there is a very self-directed, it's a much more controlled type of determination of what services you get and how much. But there is a max amount that you can get. So a lot of people who live at home have home-based, and some people who maybe need less support will use home-based and go and live in affordable supportive housing to be able to still have that directed model, self-directed model, but maybe not needing 24-hour services or anything like that. The intermittent community integrated living arrangement we're going to start getting to our gobbledygook. It's also called ISILA a lot of times. ISILA is the services that you can get in SILA, 24-hour SILA group homes, but you're able to do it, you're able to kind of determine the services. You use a provider to run all your services, and you can get from 15 hours all the way up to 86 hours a week in services. So that's basically all service hours except for sleeping and if you go to community day. And so you can get actually a lot of services, and some people do. We want to sing the praises of it to say more people should consider this as we think about remote supports and other ways to support people maybe virtually to add kind of that extra little bit of support. Intermittent SILA or ISILA is really helpful when people want to live either by themselves or with maybe a smaller situation like two people living together, and again, living in more affordable housing or in a more cheaper rental area, where it gives you the opportunity to really live in an integrated or included way in the community if you don't need 24-hour services. We have 24-hour SILA, which is, we think of as stereotypically group homes, which could range from 2 to 8 people. We're trying to get that number down because I think all of us, I haven't lived with 7 other people in a very long period of time. And I know most people probably don't want to. So we're trying to, from the division, encourage smaller, but they can range. Then these homes are really the provider, it might be individually controlled, but the provider really offers services and supports 24 hours a day in those homes. There's also an option that's a 24-hour SILA option called host family, which means a family member or family could say, we have 2 extra rooms in our house. We would love to have someone come stay with us and live with us for that period. And so they offer the supports outside of community day and things like that for the person. And it gives a little bit more of a kind of home and family environment without the person living with their own family. And then we have services like community day programs. We have our kind of more traditional kind of facility-based programs. We have more community integrated programs that start and end in the community. We're again trying to really encourage more diversity of thinking as far as community day, as CDS providers provide more in different services, because I know people really do want more of a flexibility, more of a choice, more of a fluidity in their lives and in their services, especially coming out of COVID. And then lastly, we offer some supported employment services, so things like job coaches. So after a person goes through the Division of Rehab Services to get their job, to help support them get their job, if they have waiver services and they need a continued ongoing support, such as a job coach, the waiver will pay for that. So those are just an array. There are a number of things, we'll talk about a few more in a little bit, but there are a number of efforts we're taking to try to offer different alternatives and really work outside the box. We'll talk about the Independent Service Coordination Agencies, or ISCs, which are case management organizations that are supposed to really help families kind of figure out what works for them. The great thing about the waiver is if you decide, or a person decides, I'm 25 years old, I live like many other 25-year-olds that don't receive waiver services, I want to stay with my family for a little bit. You can get home-based and stay with your family for a number of years, and then when you hit 30, 31, 32, maybe you're ready for a break and they're ready for a break, and you can move into a 24-hour SILA situation or an ISILA situation. You're able to move around within the waiver. So you're not once you choose services, you aren't locked in forever. You are just able to go to your ISC and then work to try to identify new and different services that you might want. This works sometimes better than others, I will qualify. This is just a breakdown just so you can get a sense. I think these numbers are actually a little old, although I got them from one of my colleagues, because home-based services now is bigger than SILA. So SILA, remember, it's actually either intermittent or 24-hour group home kind of situations, 24-hour services through providers versus home-based. And home-based is now about 12,000 people. And you'll see the size, we have about 25,000 people or so that are in waiver services, and we have about 5,800 that are in the more institutional services. All right, so we're going to talk for just a minute, to make sure I'm okay on time, about, I didn't change this. I changed it, I guess, after we talked, darn it. So there's actually 7 ISCs. One actually just transitioned in July, so this is an old slide, I apologize. But next on one of the slides down, I think the next slide after this, there's a link that we can share this, and there's a link where if you don't know who your ISC is, your Independent Service Coordination Agency, your case manager for home and community-based services, you can go to this link and put your county in, I think, and it'll tell you who your ISC is and give you contact information. There are 12 regions. ISCs can do a lot of things for you. This is part of the reason I encourage people to sign up early and often for PUNs. I say that often, but once you sign up once, you only have to sign up once. But because then you get connected with your ISC. Your ISC can actually try to connect you with services that aren't waiver related. So you can sign up for PUNs, which we'll talk about in a second, which is hey, I'm going to want services, home and community-based services now or in the future. You can also ask them about affordable housing. You can ask them about respite services and information and resources and family support. There are an array of services that are mostly grant funded through the division, but that they can connect you with. They're also pretty aware of early intervention and other kinds of just generally services, since a lot of these case managers have worked in this world for a while. So they can be helpful. They are a little overwhelmed at times, but they can really be helpful to connect. The ISD is also the person that once you receive a selection letter that you have received, that you can now like get adult services, they can help you go through the process to figure out what services you want, which is also really helpful. And they'll kind of, ask you to do, submit paperwork, and then they'll kind of go through the paperwork. They'll talk to you about kind of your options for services. They also help to lead the person who's the waiver recipient and their family, if so inclined, in the person-centered planning process. And this is really at the heart of the work that's done, because they go through a discovery process to understand what a person really wants in terms of their hopes and dreams and needs. And then it turns into and comes out a personal plan. And the personal plan outlines what services the person wants. That outlines if they have preferences about certain things, if they want to have a job. It kind of goes through a lot of different categories. It's a pretty long document, but it's really important because from there is you get, or a person would get connected to service providers to help provide those services. So out of the personal plan, each service provider that's working with you would create an implementation strategy, which is just a fancy way for saying, hey, you want supported employment, here's what we're going to do to support you in that desire. And so the ISD helps to lead that process. And then finally, as I kind of talked about before, the ISD is the person you go to if you want to change services within a waiver. If something changes and someone was maybe in a more independent situation and maybe needs more 24-hour support, the ISD would help you make those changes. I think it's important to remember ISD both because they can connect you with services, but also because we use that acronym a lot because ISDs are sort of integral, hand in hand with service providers and kind of getting you what you need. So PUNS. PUNS is another one that is another acronym, not acronym, because it used to be an acronym. It used to stand for Priority of Urgency of Needs, which is a fancy way for saying the most needy people should go to the top. And it switched over to just PUNS because too many people know it as the PUNS list. Basically, it's the list of people that want waiver services now or into the future. And that could be children, that could be adults, that could be teens. It really is kind of all the way, runs the gamut. And people can sign up in seeking services, as in I want services now or in the very near future, or planning for services. I just generally encourage people to sign up for seeking because unfortunately we have a wait for services. So, you can spend the 4 to 5 years that you're waiting to plan. So I generally think because with planning, when you turn 18 and seeking, your clock starts, which means that you can start accruing the time that it takes for you to be selected. So you're kind of down here on the list when you turn 18 and you slowly move up over time, but you have to be in seeking to move up that list to the selection point. So it's important to be in seeking, or at least know if you're in planning that the time you're waiting doesn't accrue, doesn't count towards being selected for services. There's a phone number here, and there's also a link to the DHS locator. This link goes to the ISD to which you are located. ISDs are regionally based, so you don't get to choose from 5 or from 7, I guess. You get the one where you live. You can, however, advocate to change case managers if for some reason you would like to change case managers. Okay. So a little bit about the PUNS, a little more details about the PUNS. So there are technically, when you look on the website, there are about 14,000 people who have indicated they want services now or in the future. About 12,000 of them are in seeking. So if we, got $1 trillion tomorrow and we're like, we're just going to eliminate all the lists, there's about 12,000 people that say that they want services now. In reality, of those 12,000, about 5,500 are people over 18 who are seeking services as an adult. So as we think about and as you approach adult services, you can have that kind of in your mind. We've whittled this number down pretty significantly, which I'll talk about in a second, but that's about 5,500 now. The expected waiting time right now is a little bit less than 60 months or 5 years. So if you do the math, we are just short of that key 4-year mark for someone to be able to transition out of school at 22 and immediately go in services. It's sort of like there's a little bit of a gap. We're less than a year now, but it's not. We're not there yet. We're working hard towards it though, because I think we all know it would be much better if people had seamless services. But it's about a 4 to 5 year wait is what I would say. And then for kids, there's about 3,200 kids 17 and under who are seeking children's support waiver. I want to pause for a second and say, well, I think there's a later slide. Last year was the first year in 11 years that we pulled kids off the children's support waiver. This is the home-based waiver, so kids that are living at home. And this year we're pulling 500, well, actually we're pulling about 1,200 kids to get the 500 that we want to try to expand the waiver to. So this number will go quickly. So I really do encourage, if people think that they might want a help through the children's support waiver, make sure to sign up. And if you sign up for PUNS for adult services, that doesn't always default that you get kids. So make sure that you are selected as wanting children's support services, the children's support waiver, if you, the next time you talk to your ISC, because really there's a strong interest in really investing in kids support, because we're seeing there's some challenges with crisis as people move to adults. And if we can invest better and support families better as kids, we all know that'll be a much more supported and maybe solid bridge between children to adults. Not only that, but if you are in the children's support waiver, you automatically get to transition to the adult services waiver. So it's a really great idea if you are not signed up, to make sure that you can sign up for the children's support waiver PUNS list. This is, I guess, what I forgot that I had the slide. So this last year, the governor's budget proposed to the waiver, wants to add 500 children to the waiver, which means I actually think we're pulling about 1,200 youth, because believe it or not, there are people that say they don't need it right now. So to get a 500 person take-up rate, we've basically been doubling the number of people we're pulling. And then with adults, we pull about 700 per the Ligas Consent Decree, which means about, this is a little bit higher, I think, a little bit lower actually than this number, about 1,000 to 1,200 adults will be pulled. And this is, again, based on time waiting, both for children and for adults. So with children, it would just be, since you've been on PUNS. For adults, it's 18 on. And we do have a fabulous email that if you are already on PUNS and you're like, what, how much time do I have yet? We do have an ability to estimate that. So you can email this number to estimate. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the Ligas Consent Decree. This is the consent decree, as you probably know, is an agreement that comes out of class action lawsuits between a government entity, the state in this case, and a group of people. And we've had the Ligas Consent Decree since 2011. I thought we had that in there, but I guess not. And since 2011, so we're going on 12 years of the decree. And the Ligas class members, so if you were in person, I'd say, how many people are on PUNS? Raise your hands, because you all are Ligas class members. So Ligas class members include people that are waiting at home, waiting for services, as well as people that are in larger ICFDDs that are actually 9 and above. So what happened was Stanley Ligas lived in a large ICF, and him and his friends wanted to move out to the community back in 2005. And the government said, you know, you got to go on this wait list. And by the way, this wait list might be like 20 years. And so they sued, and it became a class action lawsuit. And the state said, you know, you got a point. We probably should move this faster. We'll agree to invest time and money and energy to work with the parties, work with the class members and their lawyers, and a court monitor who's supposed to be an independent person, and come up with strategies to make things better. So we focused on, and the consent decree focuses on, the class members, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and their right to person-centered, coordinated, integrated, community-based system of support, and that they have the right to access that. So you have a right to quality services in the community that supports you in the community, and you have the right to actually access it at a reasonable speed. Reasonable pace is what they call it. And so with that, we've seen a lot of success. So in the last 12 years, with the waiver itself, the number of people receiving home and community-based services has grown by 158%. Since fiscal year 2017, more than $600 million of new money has come into home and community-based services and been invested. And that we've seriously decreased the waiting time. When Stanley Ligas wanted to get out and move into the community, they were looking at 10 to 20 years of wait, depending on your need and that sort of thing. And so it really was this opaque way of trying to access services, and it wasn't moving quickly at all. So kind of what's next with the consent decree? I do think that the state is, the judge has talked about we should start talking about exit at some point in the near future. I think we've really tried to invest in the work, but there's more to be done. A couple of years ago, we sort of were told by the judge, I'm concerned that you aren't paying the amount of money the services cost that you're trying to require providers to provide. So we did a rate study, which is basically like, let's figure out actually how much these services cost so that we can figure out a way to pay them appropriately. And that rate study, when it's fully funded in a couple of years, it'll be about $750 million in new money, including, and I think probably one of the most important things is that there was sort of a focus on getting frontline staff, direct support professionals for their wages to go up so that we can actually find people and stabilize the workforce. So the goal is 150% of minimum wage. So it's not, I'm sure lots of people would say it's not enough, but it's definitely more than trying to get it off of a minimum wage, trying to compare it to the McDonald's worker down the way, or, some sort of person that might be working at a minimum wage level saying, this is harder work. We want to, really invest in DSPs so that in fact, they will stay and will really support people because we need more frontline staff. We talked about already that we're investing in 500 more kids and 700 more adult waiver placements. We are increasing for the funding for self-directed. We're raising that amount that people can get as their base budget to be able to purchase services. We're expanding for people and individuals that are maybe need more stabilization support, that maybe have more support needs, behavioral support needs, and particularly we're trying to invest in targeted services that might help keep people in the community, even if they might have moments where they're struggling more and they need more support. There's a couple other things, and I think this is my last slide, or my second to last slide. We are with the court monitor, so the person that kind of works with the judge and oversees the work that we're doing. She performed a person-centered planning quality review that came out this last year, and so we're going to be working on continuing to make sure that we know what people want and we capture it through our person-centered planning process, and then we can get them what they want, because that's the goal of really person-centered planning, is it's about the person and what they want. So we're working to try to continue to increase the quality of that kind of work. We're focusing on supporting people in crisis. People who go into crisis under the definition for DD is people that are homeless or suffering from abuse and neglect. They can enter services without being selected off of PUN. But it's a fairly strict definition, but it is for people that need services immediately. So we're trying to work to really improve that system so that we can move people into services and supports as quickly as possible if they go into crisis. We are funding a pilot project called Housing Navigators. So in our ISDs and our case management groups, we've given a staff person to each ISD who is really focused on helping families determine if they might want different kinds of housing. So, we think of 24-hour Zilla as this group home model, but, for people that maybe don't need 24-hour, maybe they want affordable supportive housing, they want HUD housing, they want just a more affordable, cheaper housing in a certain other area of Illinois. There's ways to kind of support people to maybe have more independent options for services. So now there's a person in each ISD that's really focused on housing, and making sure to connect that housing and services and try to think outside the box a little bit with people on what that could look like. We are continuing to focus on employment because that's such a cornerstone of people living their lives, is having a job. So we funded a grant over the last couple of years and through this year to support organizations to expand their supported employment services so that people have more options to be able to connect with providers. And lastly, we're doing a ton of training. We're trying to really kind of invest in the service system so people and providers really feel prepared to and resourced to respond to the changing needs of the people who are now coming into the service system. We would love to hear from you. Through Ligas Consent Decree, we have a family advisory council, and we have an advisory town hall once a year. I'm sorry I didn't put the numbers or the dates on here, but you can email me and I can send them to you. There's also DD Communications, which sometimes gets in the weeds and is provider focused, but I recommend it to all families because, you know, every time there's always one or two kernels, and especially for people that are not yet connected with the waivers, it's a good thing to start getting your feet wet. You don't have to read them all, but it gives you a sense of kind of what's going on. If there are kind of issues, if there's new information, that's sort of how we communicate with people. And so looking forward, I think we're really focused on more quality and building capacity in terms of services and housing. We're really focused on decreasing staff turnover, and focused on strengthening our person-centered planning process, and decreasing waiting time, employment, and quality. So that's really kind of where we're looking as a state. And then this is my contact information. Feel free to email me. As I said, I might not know the answers, but hopefully I can try to forward you to someone who does. So feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions.